All right, welcome again, everyone, to today's program about the Jewish refugees of World War II that found safety in Shanghai. I'm Ari Goldstein, Senior Public Programs Producer at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. We have two esteemed guests today who will explore this history and the lessons it offers for our world 75 years after the war. But before they do, and before I introduce them, I want to set the stage for their conversation. Shanghai was already a cosmopolitan, international trading hub by the 1930s, but the city was divided between Chinese, Japanese, French, British, and American control as a vestige of colonialism. Shanghai's significant foreign population, which included an old community of Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews, largely lived in self-governing concessions, exempt from Chinese law. 5,000 miles away from Shanghai, many German and Austrian Jews were looking for ways to leave continental Europe as they came under increasingly brutal persecution by Nazi authorities in the 1930s. As we now know, these would-be emigrants had few options for escape. At the Evian Conference in 1938, countries around the world, including the United States, collectively decided to shut their borders to all but a few refugees. It was against this backdrop, with the devastation of the Holocaust lying ahead and much of the world closed to Jewish refugees, that a large group found their way by ship to Shanghai, where the city's international concessions had few barriers to entry. While there is some debate as to the number, and a reliable count was never conducted, we know that at least 18,000 Jewish refugees settled in Shanghai and rebuilt their lives during the war. Most of them were restricted or relocated to the Shanghai ghetto, a 1 square mile area in the Hongkou district of Japanese-controlled Shanghai. At the Museum of Jewish Heritage, we have several artifacts in our collection that illustrate Jewish life in Shanghai during the war, which I'll pull up now, including this bar mitzvah speech of Gerd Lindenstrauss, who now goes by Jerry, given in 1942 in the Shanghai ghetto. And this, which is Jerry's Boy Scouts card. The Boy Scouts troop in Shanghai during the war was almost entirely made up of Jewish refugees from Europe. Our collection is 40,000 objects. There are other artifacts of Jewish life in Shanghai on display in the museum, which we encourage you to come check out. But this is just a taste of what Lucy Yang and Rabbi Schneier will discuss today. So let me introduce them before they jump into their conversation. Rabbi Arthur Schneier is an internationally renowned advocate for religious freedom and human rights. Born in Vienna in 1930, Rabbi Schneier survived the Holocaust as a child and arrived in the United States in 1947. He is founder and president of the Appeal of Conscience Foundation and has served as senior rabbi at New York's Park East Synagogue for more than 50 years. He's also served as vice president of the World Jewish Congress and chair of the U.S. Commission for the Preservation of America's Heritage Abroad. And of note for today's conversation, Rabbi Schneier led the first interfaith mission to China in 1981 and was appointed by President Bill Clinton in 1998 to start a dialogue on religious freedom with Chinese President Jiang Zemin. In 2001, President Clinton presented Rabbi Schneier with the Presidential Citizenship Medal. In conversation with the rabbi is Lucy Yang, a general assignment reporter with Eyewitness News since 1993. Lucy has reported from Auschwitz and around the world, and this June, she covered the Museum of Jewish Heritage's efforts to support Holocaust survivors during the pandemic. We're delighted to have them both with us, and thank everyone in the audience for bearing with the late start today due to technical issues. Without further ado, I'll hand things off to Lucy.
Thank you, Ari, and thank you, Rabbi Schneier. Thank you to the Museum of Jewish Heritage for this amazing opportunity and for these learning lectures. And thank you to the many who've tuned in. We know you'll be blessed to learn more about this fascinating chapter of history. So in the darkest days of the war, when the Nazi death march was closing in on European Jews, trapping them in their once wonderful homeland, when there weren't enough attics to hide all the Anne Franks, when the world said, no, you can't come here, there emerged one safe haven in the storm, far away in Shanghai. The Jews did not need a visa to enter, and so they arrived, some 20,000 strong, They found a safe harbor to live and worship and survive. They lived in a camp called The logistics of providing for so many fleeing families was taxing financially and also in terms of public health and jobs. But these refugees thrived. There were many unsung heroes who made this massive exodus possible. Rabbi Schneier, would you take us deeper now into this fascinating period of time where so many lives were saved?
First, I want to thank you, Lucy, for joining us this afternoon. And Ari, you really captured very briefly the state of Jews in Shanghai during World War II. And I want to thank Jack Klieger and the Jewish Heritage Museum for not only remembering the Shoah, but also pointing out places of refuge and saluting those righteous who saved human lives. So, Lucy, I have a particularly affection for Shanghai because in Vienna, after Kristallnacht, my widowed mother and I tried to find a place of refuge. And we couldn't get a visa to the United States, a long waiting period. We ended up in Hungary. Most of my family ended in the crematory of Auschwitz. But Shanghai, we could have gotten to Shanghai if we would have had passage, but wait 1 year. So I believe in Thanksgiving. It's very appropriate that we do have this program after Thanksgiving, because really it's a matter of giving thanksgiving to the people of Shanghai who opened their hearts and welcomed over 20,000 refugees, Jews who had to flee the Nazi persecution.
Can you tell us about their lives there and what they found and how they survived and just their daily existence in Shanghai, Rabbi?
But I actually had occasion in 1981, when I led the first Appeal of Conscience Foundation delegation to China, to meet many of the Jewish neighbors in the Hankou district where the Jews resided. Thanks to the wonderful work, not only of the local population, but also the Joint Distribution Committee, which I'm very proud to be a board member of. And remarkable stories, how many of the refugees paid back as professors in mathematics and physics, doctors, in so many ways. They related how they benefited by the very presence of the refugees who came from Germany and Austria under the Nazi persecution. Lucy, what's your next question? Louis.
Rabbi, I'm sorry, I'm having some audio issues. I didn't hear all of that. I want to talk about the young children who were in Hankou at the time who escaped. And I read that some of them were bar mitzvahed and bar mitzvahed during their time in Shanghai, and that the refugees had turned their camp into a little Vienna. They opened shops and restaurants. They found whatever jobs they could, even if it was well below their previous talent and expertise. Can you tell us about this inner spirit to survive and to thrive in these refugees?
Well, it was not an easy adjustment coming from Europe, but it was a safe place, a haven of refuge. And again, what they tried to do is to rebuild Jewish life. There were already existing synagogues in Shanghai, long-standing history of Sephardi Jews, the Kaduris, Sassoons, who are very, very helpful in welcoming some of these refugees. They built the Jewish day school. They had youth organizations. They had soccer teams. They tried to rebuild a life that was lost to them when they had to escape from the Nazi terror.
And they did not meet anti-Semitism in China, is that correct, when they landed?
Well, I can tell you, based on my frequent visits to China, Chinese people have a long history, just like the Jewish people have a long history. And I can tell you, while we've seen a renewal of anti-Semitism in Europe, even in the United States, even in New York, I must tell you, I did not find anti-Semitism at all from Chinese people. And that explains also the parallel long history of the Jewish people and the Chinese people. And then you had Chinese Jews actually residing in Kaifeng. And right here at Parky Synagogue, we had an exhibit remembering the Jews of Kaifeng who were cut off for a while. Also, again, there are now, it's interesting that we have this program tonight, but on December 8th in Shanghai, the museum for Shanghai Refugee Jewish Museum will open up an expanded wing showing the life. And I urge all those who will visit Shanghai to actually visit that museum. You'll be able to recapture of that life, how it worked in those difficult days. No?
Lucy, I'm just popping in. Can you hear me clearly?
Where?
Okay, I can hear you. I've lost the rabbi. I'm sorry, I
I
can't.
think you're both coming through clearly to the audience. He had just finished talking about the life of the refugees in Shanghai and the communal institutions they built, including the Shanghai Jewish Refugee Museum.
Okay, so there was a Chinese diplomat in Vienna named Ho Fengshan. He issued exit visas by the thousands because he felt that was the right thing to do to save these Jews who knew the fate that would befall so many of them. And I believe he is highlighted at the museum. Now, there were established titans in China already, the Kaduris you mentioned, Rabbi, the Sassoons, who donated funds and training, food and jobs. It took so many hands, so much heroism really, and generosity to help these refugees land in Shanghai. Can you talk about this network of people from all over the world who helped and talk about their legacy, Rabbi?
Well, I think you mentioned what I call a hero diplomats during the Holocaust. And by the way, he made it possible for Jews from Vienna to actually enter Shanghai and no visas were required. Yes, we should salute hero diplomats like Wallenberg, or the one who saved my life, the Swiss diplomat in Budapest, Karl Lutz. Yes, but as I mentioned before, the welcoming on the part of the Sassoons and the Kaduris who lived there for and contributed much to Chinese life, the fantastic work of the Joint Distribution Committee, and again, the resilience of the refugees who were determined to rebuild not only Jewish life, but also to make a contribution of thanksgiving to the welcoming population. You know, I said to the mayor of Shanghai when I brought 54 former refugees with me from Israel and the United States. And I said to the mayor at the time, you know, any mayor of Auschwitz will not be able to forget the association of Auschwitz and the crematoria of Auschwitz. Any mayor of Shanghai will always have the honor, a place of refuge for Jews during World War II. What a difference. What a difference. And so what we did, and by the way, two of them were actually students of the Mirror Yeshiva that came through, again, through a hero diplomat, a Japanese hero diplomat in Latvia. Made it possible for them to go through Japan, coming to Shanghai, and actually build the Mirror Yeshiva in Shanghai. So quite a history. And what we do at Parky Synagogue, every year we do remember the hero diplomats, and we also remember, as we had a major Israeli and Chinese delegation, remembering the people of Shanghai, which also in '94, I dedicated a monument in Chinese, in Hebrew, and English with the 54 survivors as an expression of gratitude. But if you want to know also about Jewish life, synagogue life, I can tell you that in, well, why don't you ask the next question? And then I'll talk about that too.
Okay, Rabbi. So we are receiving wonderful comments from the audience. We are hearing from second, third generation families who went through Shanghai, whose ancestors, whose grandfathers and some great grandfathers lived that journey. And I love reading these comments. Rabbi, can you talk to us sort of en masse, what happened to this community? Where did they go after the war? Did any stay? And where are they now, besides the few that we're hearing from who are all over the world? Can you talk to us about this group of refugees?
After the war, obviously many of them wanted to return to their homes, but for some of them to go back to Germany or Austria was a no. So they tried to come to the United States, as many of them did, or they went to Palestine at the time, and therefore you had a dwindling of the refugee community in Shanghai. By the way, it's very interesting to know that the former Secretary of Treasury of the United States, Blumenthal, also survived as a refugee in Shanghai. So I want to tell you, though, that let's talk about Jewish life now, if you're interested in that question.
Sure, Rabbi.
All right. So now there are about, anything between 5,000 to 6,000, mostly expatriate Jews. Some are grandchildren who went into business of refugees of Shanghai, expatriates, diplomats who are Jews, and you do have now 3 synagogues in Shanghai. You do have for the expatriate community, and then I don't know whether Ari has the picture, but in 1998 I accompanied President Bill Clinton and the First Lady Hillary Clinton on their summit to China, after having spent 1 month in China. And this is You see, in 1994, when we had the seminar on Jews from Shanghai, where we discussed the whole history, but also I made sure that the Ohel Rachel Synagogue, which became a storage room, and by the way, that is the Torah scroll from Parky Synagogue that I and my wife Elizabeth took to Shanghai with the President and Mrs. Clinton, and you see the inscription on the Torah scroll, which we gave to the Ohel Rachel Synagogue for use in honor of the people of Shanghai who saved Jewish life during World War II, and the visit of President William J. Clinton and First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton to the restored historic landmark Ohel Rachel Synagogue in Shanghai, presented by Rabbi Arthur Schneier, Parky Synagogue, sister historic landmark. So the good thing now is when you go to Shanghai or go to Beijing, you can have kosher food, you can observe your holidays, which was not the case, let's say this is by the way the ark of the Ohel Rachel Synagogue that was a storage facility used by the Board of Education. And when I first entered it in the 80s, it was very painful to see this beautiful synagogue, which was built in 1929, used as a storage facility. And I negotiated with many of the top leaders of China. And that Ohel Rachel Synagogue is used now on holidays, Purim Festival, Hanukkah is coming up. And again, the expatriate community, Jewish community in Shanghai today has the ability to practice their faith and to take advantage of the availability of kosher food and 3 Lubavitch synagogues which exist.
You also had an experience with a museum that is established there, and they recently expanded the exhibit. Can you tell us about the museum and what artifacts were kept and what we could learn from this museum there, Rabbi?
I think the museum was actually open in the first time in 2018. It's in the Hankou district where most of the Jews resided. When I say most of the Jews, the refugees. And it depicts the various monuments, the Jewish historic experience. And now it has expanded. And on December 8th, it will be opening. And in fact, I sent a message for the opening. But the exciting thing about it, that in 1981, when I first visited China, no diplomatic relations with the state of Israel, and worked very hard in 1992 to make sure that that bridge is established. And interestingly enough, on December 8th, the Consul General of Israel will participate in the opening of the expanded Shanghai Jewish Refugee Museum. So Jewish heritage is very au courant. Your timing of our discussion, Lucy, is very appropriate. Maybe we can have a link with the opening of the Shanghai Jewish Refugee Museum on December 8th.
Well, thank you for always thinking ahead, Rabbi. We appreciate that. Always something to look forward to, and that will be a very exciting day for sure. We have some questions from the audience, and I can see the audience there's lots of scholars here because they're asking for books to read to learn more about this topic. Do you recommend any books? And for a little more context and flavor, can you describe just how hard it was for these refugees to leave Europe, to end up in Shanghai, and that journey that they were on, and how did some get the funding for this? How did they make this work, Rabbi? We'll start with the books.
Actually, I recommend that you just Google Jewish life in Shanghai, and you'll find quite a bit of literature on the subject. Also, I think there was plenty of available personal evidence, which both the Jewish Heritage Museum has and also the Holocaust Museum in Washington and Yad Vashem in Israel. So that would be my recommendation for source material, but easily available. There's some personal history biographies that were written in terms of Jewish life, what they experienced. So I would recommend that.
Can you talk about the travel and that exodus? Can you talk about funding, how these families were able to pay for that? I believe there was an Italian cruise ship that helped a lot in moving the families. Can you discuss that a little bit, Rabbi?
In Judaism, we have a principle. We're all responsible for one another. Kol Yisrael arevin zeh lazeh. And again, it manifested itself also in welcoming the refugees. As I mentioned before, you had a long history of a very generous Sassoon and Kaduri family, and they were very helpful. You had already in Shanghai living Jews who came from Russia in the 20s, but then the Joint Distribution Committee, which has done a fantastic job, has aided them in trying to start life again. It was a struggle, difficult adjustment, not only in terms of geography, weather, in terms of language. Then you had also war, and then the occupation of Shanghai by the Japanese at the time. So again, they survived. They survived. And not only did they survive, but they lived to see children and grandchildren who are now grateful for their survival.
Somebody asked in the audience, who are the Kaduris, who are the Sassoons? This book was given to me by the museum so I could prepare for today's lecture, The Last Kings of Shanghai. I thought it was a fascinating look back at those two families. I was not familiar with them at all. I was not familiar with this exodus either and the refugee camp. This is a great colorful book into that period of time.
Lucy, I'm glad you mentioned that. I was going to recommend this book, but also when you go to Shanghai, the Peninsula Hotel, or in New York City, Peninsula Hotel, or you go to Hong Kong, Peninsula Hotel, this was all owned by the Kaduris. And Michael Kaduri's father and uncle built a magnificent synagogue in Hong Kong, which I visited, which was still under British rule at the time. And Michael Kaduri is still carrying on the family tradition. Very worthwhile reading, quite a bit of history.
Yes, so for those who asked, and for books and for more background on these two families, it's a great write-up. There is a question about their quality of life. Ari showed us at the beginning the Boy Scout. identification card, which I thought was precious. And I think we want to, can you give us a little more flavor into their daily life, their existence? For example, how did they get kosher food? How did they create their own markets, their own, economy within Hongqiu? Can you talk about that, Rabbi?
I did not survive regrettably, I did not survive in Shanghai. So I cannot give you my personal experience. I can tell you my horrors of surviving the Holocaust in Budapest. So I cannot give you a daily encounter of those who were lucky enough to end up in Shanghai, which I unfortunately did not succeed. But in talking to their neighbors, in talking to second generation children of refugees, I think they are the best ones really to relate and to respond to that question. And many biographies have been written. Many biographies have been written. For instance, the Ganger family. Joe Ganger was a yeshiva, Bahur, Mirror Yeshiva, Latvia, Japan, Shanghai, and then his son, his daughter in New York, also very active in terms of relationship with China. So my recommendation is, if you really want to know what kind of hardship and what kind of positive life they enjoyed, the best way to talk to them, to their grandchildren, to their children, who could tell you the true story.
Okay, that's great. And some of the audience members are also suggesting some documentaries that have been made. There's a couple
Didn't
of
get that one.
recommendations on the chat. There are some recommendations for documentaries and other books. Here's another question, and it gets into diplomacy a bit. Do you happen to know if there was pressure from the Germans to the Japanese who controlled Shanghai at that point to begin persecuting these Jews? Or I don't know if you can elaborate on that. I don't mean to throw.
Yes, there is evidence, in fact, in 1943, tremendous pressure by Nazi Germany to enforce some restrictions, and more than restrictions, on the Jews in Shanghai. And the only thing that occurred as a result of that pressure is to push all the Jews, all the refugees, into the Hankou district. But it was not a ghetto, and there were no walls. But the Japanese, while they did not completely implement what the Germans wanted, they did manage to overcome the pressure by having them in the Hankou district. And that's how they were saved.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But the answer is yes.
Brutalization.
There was definitely pressure, correct.
But there was no brutalization of them while they were in Hankou. One woman writes that her uncle played soccer while there. He was on the soccer team.
Yeah, they as I said, they had youth groups. They had Zionist organizations. They tried to duplicate a life that was lost, in Germany and Austria. They had their orchestras, they had their coffee houses. I'm sure they had Apfelstrudel and all the delicacies of the Viennese cuisine.
So in this time period, I think we can underscore how unstable the world was. Even Shanghai had a series of occupiers in Shanghai, nothing was certain. Plus, they were on the verge of their civil war too. So there was just, the ground was shaking everywhere. No one really had safe landing, except this area seems to have proven they were not attacked, they were not persecuted in Hongqiu. They were allowed to live, they were allowed to thrive, they were allowed to find haven until, I guess, they decided to move on after the war. And that's powerful. You mentioned, Rabbi, your trips to China as part of the team. Can you talk to us about how the Clinton administration got involved in this issue and in this arena, and how you became involved in that as well?
As I said, my first mission was 1981. I could not get the visa for my interfaith team of the Appeal of Conscience Foundation in the United States because there were no diplomatic relations between the United States and the People's Republic of China. So we had to go to Ottawa. And there was no Chinese embassy in Ottawa either, except a Chinese office, which was an embassy, in a apartment building on the 12th floor. And no furniture. Anyhow, we met the ambassador, we got the visa, and that started a relationship with the religious communities of China. And you have to understand that China recognizes only 5 religions: Buddhism, Taoism, Islam, and also Catholic and Protestant. Judaism is not an officially recognized religion like many others. And I was in my discussion when I was appointed by President Clinton to spend a whole month in China, meeting with President Jiang Zemin and all the top leaders whom I meet till this very day. And obviously, I said, what about Judaism? You recognize Protestant, Catholic, and you do not recognize the mother faith? He said, well, we don't have any Jews living. All right. Yes, there were many Jews, Chinese Jews in Kaifeng, but there were only 7 Chinese Jews left when I was there. When Hong Kong became part of China, I said to the president and the leader of China, wait a minute, now you have 5,500 Jews in Hong Kong. Well, how about it? Anyhow, I think what I was able to achieve with my colleagues, establish relationship with all religious communities in China, host delegations from China in the United States, building bridges between people-to-people relations, and also being very, very candid in terms of making sure that you saw, for instance, the Catholic, the Holy See, Vatican, just entered into an agreement for the appointment of bishops. Anyhow, there is a basis in terms of people-to-people relations. Governments come and go, and we have to strengthen the people-to-people relations. And that's exactly what my personal experience has been. And I think it can benefit not only our own faith, but it could advance human dignity and strengthening bilateral relations between countries.
You are a fabulous diplomat, Rabbi. You mentioned earlier there were 3 Lubavitch synagogues. Can you talk about, so those are remaining as Lubavitch synagogues, or are there other orthodoxies there? Are there, is it predominantly Hasidic?
Well, I can tell you that in the 80s, Oel Racial Synagogue was still not functioning. It was a big debate. should be a museum, should be restored. It was my major project. And first I got a concession, yes, okay, you're gonna have services on Rosh Hashanah, and then Passover. And then a concession, when you, Rabbi Schneier, come to Shanghai, we're gonna have services, Shabbat services in the whole Rachel Synagogue. Anyhow, that's established. The Lubavitch first started in the to be exact, it was in early 90s. Rabbi Greenberg of Shanghai was brought in, and I tried to get someone from my own alma mater, Yeshiva University, who did not want to become a pioneer. So glad to know that Rabbi Greenberg came in, and in his home established a regular service. But what was interesting, not only were you able to have services on Saturday morning and every day, but after Saturday morning services, his wife made sure that you were welcome. And the same thing goes for Rabbi Freundlich, who is now in Beijing. So these are home congregations. Before the war, there were many congregations in Shanghai, which I visited, which no longer, their buildings were replaced by, apartment houses and so forth. So now, with the greater number of expatriates in Shanghai, you have 3 Shanghai home services for the expatriates, just as you have them in Guangzhou, or you have them in Beijing. And I must salute Rabbi Freundlich, who not only with his wife established a wonderful home service, but a Montessori school and a mikveh. And if you want to have kosher cheese and kosher wine, you can get it, particularly now with the relationship between Israel and China normalized.
Okay. Rabbi, you talked about bringing the Torah. We had a photo of the Torah, beautiful. Can you elaborate on bringing it in? Did you have to smuggle it under your jacket? Did you have to pull any strings? How did you get this Torah? This beautiful.
I'm glad you asked that question. Okay, that became a major issue. When I notified the embassy in Washington that I'm going to bring this Torah, so no, we had instructions, absolutely not. So then I went back to my contacts in Beijing and said, wait a minute, I need the Torah for my own use. So they relented. And then Mrs. Schneier and I, Elizabeth and I, had to actually purchase a seat for the Torah in the United Airline. And then we came to the airport. Same problem. They wanted me to leave the Torah at the airport. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. So then you find that the President Clinton and the U.S. delegation, they stayed in the Portman Hotel on the 44th floor. We were on the 41st floor, and I was able to bring the Torah in to my, again, only to my room. And I was pushing and pushing and pushing. And then there was a lockdown in terms of traffic because of the presidential visit. And there was a meeting of the Consul General and the entire advanced staff in the hotel. And at 9:30 in the morning. And the decision was, Rabbi Schneier, it's not going to work. Okay, let's just forget about it. So, luckily, I was very, very friendly with the Chinese ambassador in Washington. I called him. He was on the 38th floor. I said, I need to see you. And he said, look, I have the doctor now, I have a sore throat, but I'll be there in 45 minutes. Fine. I took out an encyclopedia, Judaica, translated into Chinese, and I showed them what the Torah is all about. And I said, I want you to relate this message to President Jiang Zemin. There's a win-win situation. I don't know what the obstacle is. He said, well, you know what? The president is not in Beijing now, he's in the south, but I'll get back to you. So as far as the U.S. delegation was concerned, there'll be no Torah at the whole racial synagogue, no visit by Secretary of State Albright and Hillary Clinton, the First Lady, and Chelsea. No Torah. They would visit the Well Rachel, no Torah. Okay. Then I got word, yes, okay, you can bring the Torah, but no ceremony. Okay. So we stood in front of the ark, and I think you have a picture of Hillary Clinton, Chelsea, myself, and Secretary Albright. And I was going to, keep my word not to put it in. But actually, this was the exhibit in the old racial synagogue of Jewish life. But then you have a picture in front of the ark, I hope, in Ohel Rachel. But you see my wife. No, this is, no. You see my wife a little bit, Madeline Albright, myself, and then the wonderful advisor, a professor of sociology, First Lady, Hillary Clinton, and visiting the old racial synagogue, which was used at that time as a museum. And they're looking at the pictures of Jewish life in Shanghai at the time. But there was a picture of us in front of the ark with the Torah in the old racial synagogue. I don't know whether you have it.
Unfortunately, those are all the pictures that we have in the presentation, Rabbi.
Anyhow, again, it was a very moving picture. And the reason I say it was very moving, because I was reluctant to put the Torah into the ark based on the agreement. And then Hillary Clinton said to me, Arthur, go for it. Okay. And I put the Torah in. And by the way, all this was covered in the worldwide press, I think New York Times and so forth. A lot of coverage on this. And now the Ohel Racial Synagogue uses this Torah on all the occasions when the synagogue, when the Ohel Racial is used. And also Rabbi Greenberg has the Torah too.
Bravo to you for getting that Torah in there and for plowing through despite a mountain of no's along the way. I think when God is on your side, who's going to stand against you? And so that's a blessed story. I love it. I am curious why they said yes at the end. I don't think the president read the Chinese translation in all that time, in that short period of time. And maybe they knew you weren't going to take no for an answer.
You know, when you're a Holocaust survivor, I think it's a basic principle. You don't give up. Mm. And I think this has been my message during this very terrible pandemic time that we're facing. Never give up hope. Never give up hope. And this is really the message, if you know Jewish history, yes, even Chinese history. How did we survive? So, also, very important to remember, one very important principle in Judaism, gratitude, not only on Thanksgiving Day, gratitude every day of our life, and make a contribution to life. And when you look at the history of Holocaust survivors, look at the history of the Jewish Heritage Museum, or Yad Vashem, or my own congregation, Parky Synagogue, where I used to have 3 rows of Holocaust survivors and their children. Each one made a contribution to this land of freedom. Very important message. So as far as I'm concerned, the Jewish Heritage Museum is not only remembers, not only remembering what was, what is, and what the future is. So I'm a perennial optimist, full of faith and not fear. And I don't usually take no for an answer.
We know that. We're learning that. Thank you, Rabbi.
Well, that's why you and I are talking, right?
Well, no one can say no to the museum when they ask you to help out on an event. And I said at the beginning, I thought this would be a blessing for the audience, and I know it was, Rabbi. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for sharing your story with us, for opening up some insight into this very fascinating period of history, which many of us have not much experience with. And thank you to the audience members. Thank you to those who are writing in on the chats. Thank you to the children, the grandchildren, the nieces, the nephews of survivors of people who went through Shanghai during the war. And you're amazing. You're all amazing. I applaud you. Thank you, Rabbi. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Lucy, when do we have a next dialogue?
I don't know if they're going to invite us back, Rabbi.
No. I think, Ari, what do you think? Did we do all right?
I thought it was great. And we've worked out the technical problems this time so we can jump in immediately next time.
Where's Jack?
Watching. I do want to echo. Go ahead, Rabbi.
No, really, Ari, thank you so much. I know you put a lot of effort into this. And again, it's a tribute to the Jewish Heritage Museum. As I pointed out, it's not only remembrance. Am Yisrael Chai. I still remember when my friend Ed Koch first was approached about having a Jewish museum of remembering the Holocaust. I also remember being in Kiev, complaining that after that terrible tragedy in Babi Yar, where 135,000 Jews were killed, there was only a little stone to remember it. And when I complained, they said to me, wait a minute, what about New York? You don't have anything. And then you're too young to remember this. There was a big difference of opinion where the museum should be located. Some Holocaust survivors wanted it near Lincoln Center, different locations. And I must say that Ed, who was a very dear, close friend, member of Parky Synagogue, he was the one who really moved for the creation and the location of Battery Park. And how fortunate for the location. So, very interesting, Lucy. I'm sure you didn't know that history about the Jewish Heritage Museum. But again, there's quite a history, because for years, Holocaust survivors carried the pain very quietly. They didn't talk about it to their children. They didn't talk about it to their grandchildren. We wanted to protect them, okay? And then finally we started opening up. And particularly with old age, they started talking and writing and so forth. But again, I am so grateful, and I will always remember Ed for many things, good things that he did for New York. But as a member of the organizing committee, I still have the mayor's declaration in my office appointing me to that committee that organized the Holocaust Museum. And then was able to get to, I'll never forget, by the way, Ari, how long have you been with the Holocaust Museum?
A little bit over 2 years. So, and we are approaching and planning for our 25th anniversary in 2022.
9/11. The smoke was still coming up. Fire trucks from all over. Ambulances lined up on the west side. I attended a meeting with Larry Silverstein, Governor Pataki, at the museum. What are we going to do? And even at the height of despair, a decision was reached. We're going to rebuild. And look what happened after 9/11. After destruction, renewal of life. I'll never forget that meeting after 9/11. After the destruction of the World Trade Center. And look what happened afterwards. Jack, I'm glad. I want to thank you for really being at the helm of this great institution. And again, I said before, and nobody heard me say it, it's not only a place for remembering, it's also an inspiration for Am Yisrael Chai, that life goes on. Second generation, third generation. Many of us thought we never would live to see another day, and here we are. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I really, Lucy, I insist that we have another dialogue on any subject you choose, okay? And any subject that you want to talk about, I volunteer to be your subject, okay?
Thank you. Thank you.
May I say something?
By all means.
First, I just want to tell you both that this has been an inspirational program. I learn something every day when I get involved with the museum. So today I learned an awful lot. And Lucy, thank you for being our sister to the museum. You are officially a museum sister. And Rabbi, you've been so important to the community, to the Jewish people, and also to the museum in its life stages. And I cannot thank you enough for not only today, but all you've done. And Ari, you've been here 2 years. I expect there will be many more to come. You did a terrific job, and I want to thank the audience for participating. But I really want to tell you, Rabbi, that your words about Am Yisrael Chai really are very touching and at the foundation of what this museum is about remembrance, about education, and about L'dor v'dor, from generation to generation. I just want to say that I make a pledge whenever I see a group of survivors, and I make this pledge to you and all of our other members, that there will always be at the museum a place where the survivors' grandchildren's grandchildren will be able to come to learn and to teach and to have a memorial to the 6 million and also to future generations. So thank you all for what you did today. I know that we have many, many members watching, and my invitation is for you to come back. And perhaps, I believe we have found an actual survivor of the Shanghai ghetto who would be willing to perhaps join in a future discussion. Not the ghetto, I'm sorry, I used the wrong term, the Shanghai community. And I believe we could find we have found someone who would be willing to talk. I think it would be a great follow-up. But in any case, all I want to say is Ashenim Dank, and thank you very much.
I just want to make one observation. You said the question, who is going to remember?
Right.
And you made a pledge, right?
Yes.
Okay. Every year, the Shabbat before International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and I work very, very hard to have that established at the United Nations. Every year on Shabbat before January 27th, it's the liberation of Auschwitz. I have the Secretary General of the United Nations and the Diplomatic Corps at Park East Synagogue. And at the last gathering last year, and by the way, we're going to have it again virtually with the Secretary General on January 25. You're all invited. At the last gathering on Shabbat, I turned to the Secretary General and said, we survivors, our numbers are dwindling. Who is going to remember? Who is going to stand up and say there's no such thing as Holocaust denial? Who is going to remember? And I must send you the speech that he gave here at Park East Synagogue. He says, my friend, we will remember. And that's why International Holocaust Remembrance Day, just like Warsaw Ghetto Memorial, critical. And I'm glad the Jewish Museum took over after Ben Mead. You know, I go, it's a history now. I can write a history on the museum. So the Secretary General publicly, we have you send you the speech. We will remember. And that's why it's so important that the United Nations today has a Holocaust remembrance program where they send teams to Asia, to Africa, acquainting people with this tragedy. Because I believe it has to be known. I stood in Srebrenica in 2012, heart of Europe, 8,000 Muslim men and their sons killed, with the Dutch UN force standing by. So what we want to do, we tell the world, it's not only about us. We want to make sure that no other people will endure the kind of pain and suffering. Yeah. And that's exactly your message. That's your pledge.
Make it wholeheartedly. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, Ari, and thank you to our terrific audience.
Jack, I should also just mention before we end, my thanks to all of you, and the fact that today is Giving Tuesday, and the museum's work is only made possible because of the community members who generously give and support our educational programs, our public programs, and our exhibitions. So if you can, please support us. I'm putting a link in the chat to donate to the museum. And we also invite you to join us for our upcoming programs. We have one this Thursday, which is a look at the Charlottesville trial that's in federal court at the beginning of next year against the neo-Nazis who marched in 2017, and a broader look at extremism over the year ahead, and a robust schedule of programs, usually twice a week. So if you're new to our museum community, welcome. We hope you join us again, and we'll keep you posted with what we're doing about the story of the Shanghai Jews and the rest of the history that we preserve and interpret.
Jack, one dissenting opinion.
Yes, sir.
For us Jews,
Yeah.
there's no such thing as Giving Tuesday.
Uh-huh.
We give tzedakah every day, okay?
I remember my grandmother had more pishkas than I can imagine.
All right? And you remember the pushka?
Yep, absolutely. We
All
do
right.
it. I want you to know, Rabbi, I agree with you. We give every day.
So when we say our prayers, at the conclusion of the service, we give whatever is $1 or $2, whatever it is, tzedakah every day. So I am not I have a bit of a different view about Giving Tuesday, Giving Day, okay, which has become very in. Fine, wonderful. That's not enough. You give every day. Sharing, giving, thanking God for being alive.
Rabbi,
Ari, I didn't want to ever do something with you.
no, listen, Rabbi, you have a great future as a rabbi. I want to tell you that you are an inspiration, and I think you're going to really have a great career as a rabbi going forward. And today is just the beginning. I really hope you'll come back and talk more with the museum. Thank you for everything you've done, Rabbi, and thank you, Lucy.
Anytime. Continue.
Take care, everyone. Thanks for joining us.